Pressing record. All right.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's Sammy again. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Brian Wu. He is the co-founder and chief program officer of the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad I could be here today. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. So our first question for you is, how did you start getting involved in anti-trafficking awareness and fighting?
I first heard about human trafficking back in 2008 through a film called Call and Response. And at that point, we knew some people, or we got to know some people overseas fighting trafficking in Thailand specifically. I was working at a church. We got our church involved, taking some teams over there to work with those groups. And then a couple of years later, I met my co-founder for the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition, and she was organizing a conference called the Freedom Summit. And my wife and I started volunteering for the event. And afterwards, we realized, in a nutshell, that 1,700 people came to the Freedom Summit, and we had over 30 different organizations there at the expo. And we realized there are all these groups fighting trafficking here in the Bay Area, but no one was really working together well. And so we felt like there was an opportunity for an organization to really step into the gap to make sure people are sharing resources and collaborating together better and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. So that was 2011 where we started our nonprofit, the Bay Area Anti-Trafficking Coalition, really with a vision of building a regional response that's unified to fight trafficking together.
Right, that's awesome. I just wanted to go deeper into your work in Thailand and overseas. I know that a lot of our team is very passionate and is thinking about maybe one day doing that after college or during a gap year. What was that like?
We are friends with or got to know people in mostly working in Chiang Mai, although we also know some people in Bangkok, doing a variety of things. As you probably know, there's a lot of vulnerability there, especially the people who are in the hill tribes who are not, they really have no identity because they're not considered citizens. And so they have very little rights and they're very vulnerable. And so we know several people who are doing things from helping provide education to those who are poor there, so they have opportunities to get out of, so they have opportunities so that, one, they don't have to take false jobs that end up being trafficking jobs, or that even families have to let their children ultimately be sold into something like a sex trafficking ring or something because they can't afford to take care of them or they need money to care for them. But then we also worked with people there who are who do facilities where they take care of people who were brought out of trafficking. There was another place that was caring for women in the red light district, actually offering daycare for the women who are actually working in the brothels, but they have kids. And so they weren't directly bringing them out of trafficking at the time, but they're providing services for them while they're being exploited. So there's a whole variety of opportunities to work overseas.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to go out there one day. I know you also mentioned that you were formerly like an associate pastor at a church. A lot of our group are actually go to the same youth group, and we're trying to find a way to like intersect our faith and like this thing we're really passionate about.
Yeah.
How did you do that, or what's your story like?
Yeah, so I should back up a little bit. Before we went to Thailand, I went on a trip to China to work with orphans who had been disabled kids who had been abandoned by their parents. So these were orphans with special needs. And that trip really broke my heart in a new way. I mean, I came back just understanding that having more sympathy or empathy for those who are marginalized, those who are outcasts, those who are on the margins of our society. And so it was really after that trip that our family really got more focused in how do we stand against injustice here? How do we give a voice to people who are exploited and don't have a voice? And we really looked into different ways to be involved in compassion work here locally, as well as when we went to Thailand.
Yeah.
And so I think there are just a lot of different opportunities, and it's hard as a group, maybe like, you know, if your church already supports or partners with different organizations that do compassion or justice work locally, then you try to slide into that, or just like your group is doing with awareness for the middle school, I mean, and doing fundraisers for Missy. I mean, you start with kind of ways that you can find an organization to really partner long-term with, and and see, can you volunteer with them? Can you use unique skills to do awareness? A lot of times students are good with artistic endeavors or social media campaigns or things like that. Or so I think you kind of there's no formula for how to get involved,
Yeah.
but you kind of just look for the opportunities and start exploring things.
Yeah, thank you. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about your organization. I know you guys do like training for the people on the front line. How is that going with like COVID, and how are you able to sustain it online?
We are actually starting to move a lot of our trainings online like a year ago before COVID even
Oh,
hit, fortunately. But to back up even more, I think originally when we started, we did a lot of general awareness training for the general public. And we spoke kind of anywhere people invited us, from Rotary clubs to schools to churches to other civic groups and things, from and schools, from colleges down to middle schools. And so um, a couple of years ago, we realized that we'd have more impact. Sorry if you hear my dog barking. We'd have more impact if we identified people who are more likely to see trafficking on a daily basis.
right.
So we identified as some industries like airports, like people working in apartment complexes, like healthcare workers, people in transportation. And we started focusing our training specifically for those groups because, for example, airports, employees that work there are more likely to see a victim who's in transit. At apartment complexes, we realize there have been a lot of cases of traffickers using units as to work out of or to house their victims. And another note is that we're seeing with COVID, one of the impacts of COVID is that a lot of the illicit massage businesses that worked in storefronts, like retail shops,
Right.
they had to close, and a lot of them are now moving into rental properties, like in apartment complexes. So all that to say, we started working on those types of trainings, and this year we've been focusing on gaining expertise in what it's like to do an online training, one that's interactive, one that's engaging, and they can actually take away where they have real action steps of what to look for and how do I report it. So it's not just that they're becoming aware, but we want to make sure that whoever they're working for, they know who to call, so that there's actually a timely response so people can get help right away.
Right. Speaking of COVID-19, are you guys able to tell if there's like a decline or an increase in human trafficking? Because I know like airports are closing down, hotels, it might be easier to notice trafficking because not many people are coming in and out. Like, has the demographic shift, and what does human trafficking look like in the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a good observation. I mean, so our first airport client was SFO this year. We've been working with them, and we're looking into a whole bunch of other airports around California right now. But um, one of the things we noticed in working with them was we felt like we kept telling the airport that this is a really good opportunity to spot trafficking, because traffickers are still traveling with their victims, but there's many fewer people going through the airport because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's harder to hide. So absolutely, in that sense, there's potentially more chance to see them. But just in general, I think, I mean, we're not a service provider, so we're not working directly with survivors. But I mean, just in our partnerships with all the other organizations around the Bay Area, we see that people are facing hardships, especially financially. And so anytime you are, in an economically hardshipful situation, there's more chance that you're going to get lured by a trafficker, either to make money somehow, and then they deceive you and it's not the job you thought, or they exploit you and start selling you commercially for sex or whatever. And then it's also just harder to get in-person services if people need help because of COVID. So I think people who may be being abused are stuck with their traffickers because they're not able to get out as much. So COVID definitely has had an impact. And I think it'll remain. I don't know if anybody knows the extent at this point, but people have had to adjust, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if you know much about this. Like, this is an area of human trafficking that I know nothing about. Just like the intersection between race and who the victims are, because I know the highest population of victims are Black and Hispanic people. Um, do you know why that is, or yeah?
I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, I think in the years we've been doing this and all the people we work with who work with survivors, we see trafficking cases from every race, every socioeconomic level, every ethnicity, people who are local, people who are international, all genders. But like you said, there's a disproportionate amount of people of color who are involved in trafficking, especially, I don't know how much you're looking at labor trafficking and sex trafficking, but especially for the domestic sex trafficking issue. Most often girls of color are victims, although there are boys as well, obviously. And I think there are a number of reasons. I think anytime, I think those populations, just systemically in our country, there's been a lot of talk about racism this past year, and I think people are realizing those people start off at a disadvantage to begin with, and so there's often poverty, there's often a lack of educational resources, there's often lack of jobs, there's often more crime. There's people in those communities often grow up in systems of abuse and exploitation or all around them, which makes them more susceptible to becoming abusers or to being abused further. And so I think the risk factors are higher in those communities. I don't know that I don't know that I've read a lot of studies to show that, but and then there's this. So I just watched a film. You guys might want to check out. It's called Still I Rise. It's a Bay Area filmmaker, and she profiles two women, both women of color, and they talk a lot about this subject specifically. That there's just been a very, especially against Black women. There's just been there needs to be a whole turnaround of our objectification of them,
Right.
and while all women and even all people of color are at more of a disadvantage, I think, when it comes to trafficking, Black women specifically, there's a perception of them as that needs to change because they are used so much in this type of crime.
Right. Yeah. And that goes down to each of us individually and how we consume the media and what we talk about, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We were also our group was also thinking a lot about, because we're on our computers a lot more because we're inside. We were just wondering if you know about online recruitment and if that is getting like a lot more rampant and used more.
Yeah, I've definitely seen organizations that are trying to tackle that because everybody's on their computers more and they're at home, and our normal social circles aren't in person anymore, so it's really easy to or it's an important way to stay connected on social media and things like that. And even before COVID, I think like parents with kids on social media are always trying to play catch up on how do we keep them safe. And so especially during the pandemic, we've definitely seen cases of people who have made friends on social media with people who are not who they thought they were. There's a girl on the peninsula recently. I talked to her mother, and she ran away. She was trying to meet with this guy, and to make a long story short, she was only gone for a night, and I don't think I haven't followed up since then, but she came back, but the guy that she was trying to meet was definitely, we don't know if he was part of a trafficking ring, but he was definitely had other motives. And there's the parents were very freaked out, and once they found out that he knew where they lived, there was a lot of police involvement and all kinds of things. So all that to say, I think just general discussions about safety online and knowing who you're talking to are important because it does happen. There's recruitment happening. One airport case that we found out about, this was a few years ago before the pandemic. There's two girls who showed up at the Sacramento airport, and they were going to fly. The gate attendant started talking with them because she felt something was off. They were going to fly to New York, meet with a guy who they had met on social media. He bought them a ticket. He bought them a one-way ticket, and they were going to do some modeling or something. And she got really suspicious.
Yeah.
Had the airport security come over and actually persuaded them not to go, and did some investigation to this guy who was part of a trafficking ring. And so that all happened over social media. Unfortunately, someone on the alert stopped them from going, and who knows what would happen to them then.
Yeah, that's amazing that she was so aware. She thought about that.
That's why the training that you're doing with students, training we're doing with employees, it's a big part of just having the eyes and ears, because otherwise it really just happens hidden in front of us if no one knows what to look for and no one knows what to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions I have for you. I guess one last thing, do you have any advice for us as we try to sustain this organization? Because motivation goes up and down, especially right now.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think with issues like this, it can be easy. Well, you've been doing it now for a while, but it can be really easy to like want to just jump in and do something right away. But it's very complex, and I'd encourage anybody listening to really kind of do as much homework as possible because it's a complex issue. We're always learning. We've been doing this for a while now, but things are always changing. There's more to learn about it. There's always multiple ways to approach things. So education is huge, but also just I think maybe the one motivating thing would just be kind of everybody's got a unique sphere of influence. So find your unique way that you can spread awareness to the people that you have an impact with in the way that you can do it, whether that's whether that's on social media, whether that's doing a project for school, whether that's in your community, your faith community, or your athletic teams, or whatever, do fundraisers, or when we can do things again, have a fundraising walk or hold an awareness like movie screening or something. And everybody's got some piece they can play. And even though, if you're a student, you might not, you might not be able to vote yet, or you might not be able to go volunteer at a shelter or something. There's something we can do. And especially as students, if you get really passionate about this issue, you have an opportunity to really kind of shape a career around it. You don't have to be a police officer or a social worker, but there are ways that we can bring into whatever workplaces we're going into awareness, not just about trafficking, but just about social justice issues. And I think we can be called to create workplaces and careers that that do the right thing and where we have an impact on the people around us, and we're not just out there to
Right.
make money or whatever it looks like.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that advice. We'll definitely use that. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'd love to. So, send me your website so I can
Okay.
check it out
Yeah.
afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.